Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're really diving deep, radically deep, into some of the oldest sources we have for Western monotheism. We're looking at a scholarly picture, one built on, serious archaeology and careful textual work that really challenges that straightforward idea that Yahweh was always the single supreme creator God right from the get-go.
Hmm.
If you grew up, like many of us did, thinking the God of Abraham was just this one solitary, all-powerful being from day one, well, get ready for maybe a significant update.
Yeah, it's definitely a different picture when you look at the early evidence.
Our sources here, we're talking Hebrew manuscripts, Greek translations, those amazing Ugaritic tablets, they suggest something much more complex. A kind of hierarchy, maybe, involving two really big divine names, El and Yahweh.
That's the core of it, understanding that relationship.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to dig into the context of that relationship. We want to understand this narrative, which, has a lot of academic weight behind it, suggesting Yahweh wasn't originally the top cosmic boss.
Right, more like a regional figure.
A regional god operating under an older, higher deity, El Elyon, the God Most High. And we'll see how this context doesn't just tweak ancient history. It potentially rereads huge chunks of the Bible, even into the New Testament.
It really does ripple through the whole tradition.
And just to be clear, we're leaning on stuff that's out there, published texts, finds from Ugarit, places like that, plus solid academic work on early Israelite religion. This isn't about some, wild fringe theory we dug up.
No, this is about presenting an honest update based on the full range of ancient data that scholars have been working with for decades now.
Okay, so where do we start? To get this, we need the background, right? The ancient Near East.
Exactly. We have to set the stage. We need to understand the religious world that Israelite worship grew out of, specifically the West Semitic world. That means starting with El.
El, okay.
Yeah, El. And our best window into who El was comes from the text found at Ugarit. That's modern Ras Shamra up on the Syrian coast. These texts date back to, around the 14th to 13th centuries BCE, so quite early.
Before much of the Bible was written down.
Definitely. And these texts paint a very clear picture of El. He's the supreme father of the gods. He's the patriarch of the whole divine family, the ultimate source of authority. Think of him as ancient, wise, maybe a bit remote even, living at the source of the cosmic rivers.
Okay, so he sounds less like a, fiery warrior god and more like the elder chairman of the board.
That's a great way to put it. He's often called things that emphasize his age and stability. Abi Adami, the father of humanity, or Lat Penu, the benevolent one. And crucially, he's strongly linked with the image of a bull.
The bull.
Yes, bull El. It's a common epithet. It symbolizes this immense fertile creative power, cosmic stability. And again, this isn't some secret interpretation. This is standard stuff you'll find referenced in academic works, museum guides, encyclopedias. El is the bedrock, the pre-existing structure.
And within that structure,
Yep.
You mentioned a divine family. This is where the divine council comes in.
That's right. The divine council is the standard operating model for cosmic governance in ancient Semitic thought. You have a supreme god, in this case El, acting as the head, presiding over an assembly, a council of lesser divine beings.
Like junior gods.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
They're called the sons of God, or sometimes heavenly beings. Across different cultures in the region, they weren't just, errand boys, they were administrators. They carried out El's decisions, judged cosmic affairs.
Okay, heavenly bureaucracy.
In a way. And the key thing to grasp is that this wasn't alien to early Israel. They didn't invent their cosmology out of thin air. They worked within this existing framework. They just repurposed it over time. And we actually see strong echoes of this council right inside the Hebrew Bible. Psalm 82 is probably the clearest example.
Oh yeah, Psalm 82. That one's striking because it's God judging other gods.
Exactly. It opens, God Elohim stands in the divine assembly. He judges among the gods Elohim. Notice the same plural word, Elohim, used for both the supreme judge and the assembly members he's judging.
Wow, okay.
This isn't just poetry. It's depicting a heavenly court scene. The supreme God is taking these other divine beings to task for messing up their job, for failing to bring justice to the earth. He even tells them they'll die like mortals.
Which implies they aren't the ultimate, eternal, singular God of later tradition. They're fallible, maybe even demoted.
Precisely. It establishes a clear hierarchy. There's a supreme judge who aligns conceptually with El, and he's judging these lower judges, the council, the Elohim. This ancient setup is the essential background. But the really crucial point is how this structure seems to have been sort of papered over or dismantled within the scripture itself as time went on.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting then. How do we see that happening? Where's the evidence for this shift?
The single most powerful piece of textual evidence, the real smoking gun, if you like, comes from a very prominent place. Deuteronomy 32, it's the Song of Moses. Now, if you pick up most standard Bibles today, based on the later Masoretic text, the MT, it reads in verses 8 and 9 that when the Most High divided up the nations, he set their boundaries according to the number of the sons of Israel.
Right. That sounds very focused on Israel, like the whole world division was about them.
Exactly. It's a neat, tidy, monotheistic reading. It puts Israel at the absolute center from the beginning. However, when we look at the earliest textual evidence we have,
Like the Dead Sea Scrolls.
yes, specifically a scroll from Qumran, 4Q Deut, and also the Septuagint, that ancient Greek translation made centuries before the Masoretic text was finalized.
Yeah.
They preserve a dramatically different reading.
Okay, what do they say?
Instead of sons of Israel, these much older versions read sons of God, or sons of the gods, or sometimes heavenly beings, or even just angels.
Whoa. Sons of God, not sons of Israel.
Right. And that one change flips the entire meaning on its head. It transforms the scene. It's no longer just about Israel. It depicts a cosmic administrative act by the Most High, who is called El Elyon here, linking directly back to El.
El Elyon, the Most High.
Okay, he divides up all the nations of the earth, traditionally numbered at 70 in ancient Near Eastern thought, and he allots each nation to one of these 70 divine beings, these sons of God. They each get a territory.
Like celestial governors.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And in this division, the text originally said, Yahweh received Israel as his allotted portion, his inheritance, his specific assignment.
Wait, so Yahweh wasn't the one doing the dividing. He was one of the ones receiving an assignment.
According to this older, widely attested reading, yes, Yahweh was not the Most High God doing the assigning. He was one of the 70 sons of El Elyon, and his assigned people, his territory, was Israel. He was their national God, operating within a larger structure overseen by El.
That is huge. That completely reframes his position. He's not the CEO. He's like a regional manager.
That's a decent analogy. And you can see immediately why later scribes committed to Yahweh as the only God might have found this passage problematic.
Yeah, extremely awkward. If Yahweh is the only God, how could he be assigned Israel by a higher God, El Elyon, alongside 69 other divine beings?
Exactly. The scholarly thinking is that this reading became theologically unacceptable as Israelite religion consolidated around Yahweh alone. So the Masoretic tradition changed sons of God to sons of Israel to erase that hierarchy, to remove El's supreme role in this foundational moment and make it all about Yahweh and Israel from the start.
A theological edit, basically, to cover up the older polytheistic or henotheistic roots.
That's certainly how many critical scholars interpret that textual variation. It looks like a deliberate harmonization to fit later monotheistic theology.
Okay, this idea of an older El layer and a newer Yahweh layer, does that fit with other parts of the Bible? What about how God's names are revealed?
Absolutely. Think about that really pivotal moment in Exodus chapter 6, verses 2 and 3. God is speaking to Moses.
Right, at the burning bush or just after?
Just after, when commissioning him, God explicitly says something like, I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El Shaddai, but by my name Yahweh, I was not known to them.
El Shaddai. Okay, there's El again in the name.
Precisely. The patriarchs, the ancestors, knew the supreme deity by this compound name, El Shaddai. Now, the exact meaning of Shaddai is debated, maybe almighty, maybe of the mountain, but the El part anchors this firmly in the older supreme God tradition. Their worship was framed under the name El.
And then the text says the name Yahweh is something new revealed specifically to Moses.
Explicitly, it says, by my name Yahweh, I was not known to them. This strongly suggests a shift, a new phase in revelation, or even in the identity being emphasized. The patriarchs related to God as El Shaddai. The nation of Israel, starting with Moses, will relate to God primarily as Yahweh.
So it's not just different titles for the exact same understanding. It suggests an evolution, maybe even a transition from one conception or name being primary to another.
It certainly suggests distinct phases. The earlier, more universal patriarchal phase connected to El, and the later national covenant phase focused on Yahweh. The text itself marks this transition.
And we see El Elyon pop up elsewhere too, right? Like with Melchizedek?
Yes, Genesis 14. That's a fascinating passage. You have Abraham meeting Melchizedek, the king of Salem, likely ancient Jerusalem.
And he's called a priest.
A priest of God Most High, El Elyon. There's that name again explicitly. Melchizedek blesses Abraham in the name of El Elyon, described as creator of heaven and earth.
So Abraham interacts with a priest of the supreme El Elyon figure.
Yes, and Abraham acknowledges El Elyon's authority by giving Melchizedek a tithe. Now, some scholars argue Genesis 14 might be a later insertion into the text, which complicates using it as proof of very early beliefs.
Ah, okay.
But even if it's later, its theological purpose seems clear. It establishes a supreme, universal God, Elyon, who is recognized even outside Abraham's immediate family line. It sets up this highest divine authority distinct from the specific covenant God, Yahweh, who becomes central later.
That's interesting. Even if it was added later, the editors chose to use Elyon for that supreme role, not Yahweh.
Exactly. It shows the memory or the tradition of El as the ultimate high God was still potent, still necessary to invoke for legitimacy, even as Yahweh was becoming the primary focus of Israelite worship.
And this all circles back to the divine council idea we started with.
It reinforces it. We saw Psalm 82 depicting the council in action, with the supreme God judging the lesser Elohim. And you also have Psalm 89, verses 5 through 7.
What does that one say?
It praises God asking rhetorical questions like, who in the skies can be compared to Yahweh? Who among the heavenly beings, literally, sons of the gods, B'nai Elohim, is like Yahweh?
Okay, so again, it's not saying Yahweh's the only one there. It's saying he's the greatest among those who are there.
That's the crucial distinction. The comparison only makes sense if there are others in the assembly to compare him to. It places Yahweh at the head, perhaps the most powerful among the sons of God, the chief deity for Israel within that council structure, but still implicitly part of that larger group under the ultimate authority, El.
So if we pull Deuteronomy 32 and these Psalms together, the picture that emerges is Yahweh starting as subordinate to El Elyon, the Most High Father.
Yes. But then the biblical tradition, driven by this impulse to consolidate everything onto their national God.
They started giving Yahweh all of El's titles and functions.
Gradually, yes. Attributes, titles, creation stories, everything gets gathered under the name Yahweh. So the national God absorbs the profile of the original supreme deity. Some scholars even describe it quite provocatively as a kind of usurpation.
Like the son taking over the family business and putting his own name on the door.
That's one way to frame it, effectively erasing the memory of the original patriarch's supreme authority.
Which leads us right into the language itself. The word for God. Elohim. That's always struck me as odd, being plural.
It's a huge piece of the puzzle. Elohim is the most common word for God in the Hebrew Bible, and yes, grammatically, it's a plural form.
I've always heard the explanation that it's a plural of majesty, like the royal we a king might use. Is that not right?
That's the traditional explanation you often hear in, say, Sunday school or apologetics. And while it sounds plausible, linguistically, when you really examine how plurals work in biblical Hebrew and related languages, the plural of majesty argument is actually quite weak. It doesn't consistently explain the usage.
How so? What's the problem with it?
Well, for one thing, while the noun Elohim is plural when it refers to the God of Israel, the verbs and adjectives used with it are almost always singular. Elohim said, singular verb. The great Elohim, singular adjective implied.
Ah, okay, so the grammar is mixed. Plural noun, singular verbs.
Exactly. If it were a true, consistent plural of majesty like the royal we, you might expect more agreement, perhaps plural verbs sometimes. But you overwhelmingly get this grammatical mismatch, a plural noun acting as a singular subject. That kind of grammatical tension often signals a complex history behind the word.
So if it's not just a fancy way of saying God singularly, what is going on with Elohim?
The better linguistic explanation is that the word is functionally polysemous.
What?
Polysemous.
Mm-hmm.
It just means the word has multiple related meanings, all active at the same time. Think of the English word bank. It can mean a riverbank or a place for money. The context tells you which. Elohim works like that.
Okay, so what are the multiple meanings of Elohim?
It can absolutely refer to the singular God of Israel, the one supreme deity of later monotheism, that's meaning one. But it also clearly means other gods, plural, as in the first commandment. You shall have no other Elohim before me. There, it definitely means other deities. And crucially, meaning three. It can refer to the members of the divine council, those sons of God we talked about. Remember Psalm 82. Elohim stands in the divine assembly. He judges among the Elohim. The same word refers to the head God and the council members he's judging.
So the same word can mean the one God Other gods and members of the heavenly council.
Precisely. And this ambiguity, this polysemy, is incredibly useful if you're compiling and editing texts over centuries with different theological viewpoints at play.
How is it useful?
Because it allows the older layers of the text, the ones reflecting a polytheistic or hierarchical reality with a council of Elohim, to remain in the scripture without being totally erased. The word Elohim could just be reread by later audiences to mean only the singular God of Israel.
Ah, I see. The ambiguity allows for reinterpretation. The word itself carries the echo, the fossil, of that older divine plurality, even when the dominant theology became strictly monotheistic.
Exactly. It's a single word bridging two different cosmic maps. It's a linguistic artifact of that historical consolidation process.
That makes a lot of sense. It's subtle but powerful. Okay, so we have the texts, the names, the language. What about physical evidence? Iconography. Symbols. Does that tell a similar story?
It does, and it brings in another crucial figure we haven't discussed much yet. But first, let's talk symbols of power, particularly the bull.
Right, you mentioned bull El.
Yes. In the whole West Semitic world, bull imagery, especially horns, was a prime symbol of divine strength, power, fertility. Think about storm gods like Baal, often wearing horned helmets in depictions. It's visual shorthand for raw cosmic power.
Okay.
Now, El is Bull El, the ultimate source of that power. So when another deity starts taking over El's functions, starts absorbing his authority,
Who did naturally take over his symbols too, like the bull.
it makes sense symbolically. Yahweh inheriting or adopting the bull imagery associated with El would visually communicate that transfer of power. And this might shed light on some really contentious episodes in the Bible.
Like the golden calf.
Exactly. The story of the golden calf in Exodus is presented as the absolute pinnacle of apostasy, of turning away from Yahweh to worship a foreign idol. But what if the calf or young bull wasn't originally seen as foreign? What if it was a traditional, even legitimate symbol of the highest divine power linked to El?
So the Israelites weren't necessarily trying to worship a different god, but maybe representing the divine power they knew associated with El in a traditional form.
That's a plausible interpretation favored by some scholars. If the bull was El's symbol, then the later biblical narrative, fiercely condemning it, isn't just reporting history, it's actively rewriting it. It's taking a venerable symbol of the old supreme God and turning it into the definition of sin in order to solidify Yahweh's unique and separate status, free from those older El associations.
Wow, so the condemnation itself becomes part of the consolidation process, redefining the past.
A kind of theological PR campaign, perhaps?
Yeah.
And this tendency to rewrite and suppress extended beyond symbols. It involved erasing El's entire family structure, which brings us to the most significant suppressed figure, Asherah.
Asherah. Okay, I know her name often comes up in the context of, well, idolatry. Poles and groves the Israelites were supposed to destroy.
That's how she ended up in the final version of the biblical narrative. But that's the end of her story, not the beginning. We need to understand who she was in the original pantheon.
So who was she before she became a symbol of idolatry?
In the Ugaritic texts, our baseline for the Canaanite pantheon, Asherah, is Atharoth. She is the mother of the gods, sometimes called Quiju, the Holy One. And crucially, she is El's primary wife, his consort.
El's wife, the mother goddess.
Yes, associated with fertility, wisdom, the sea, life itself. She was a major, powerful goddess in her own right. Now, here's the critical part for Israeli history. As Yahweh began to absorb El's attributes and position, what happened to El's consort, Asherah?
Did she just disappear from worship?
Not at all. The evidence suggests she didn't vanish. She simply transferred her allegiance, or rather, the worshippers transferred her association. She became known not as El's Asherah, but as Yahweh's Asherah.
Yahweh had a consort named Asherah.
That's what the evidence strongly suggests. And this isn't just speculation based on Ugarit. This is where the archaeology becomes absolutely undeniable.
Okay, tell us about the archaeology. This sounds crucial.
It is. We have explicit physical inscriptions dated mostly to the 8th and 7th centuries BCE, the time of the Israelite monarchies. Two key sites are Kunkalet Ardrud in the Sinai Desert and Khirbet el-Kom in Judah.
What did they find there?
They found inscriptions on pottery, on tomb walls, blessings and prayers written by ordinary Israelites or maybe traveling pilgrims. And these inscriptions contain phrases that are just stunning when you first encounter them. Things like, I bless you by Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah, or I bless you by Yahweh of Teman and his Asherah.
Wait, it explicitly says Yahweh and his Asherah side by side.
Directly, unambiguously. Sometimes Asherah is represented by her symbol, maybe a stylized tree. alongside the inscription. This isn't fringe stuff. These are mainstream Israelite religious sites from the heartland during the monarchy period.
That completely demolishes the idea that pure, imageless, consortless monotheism was the standard from the start.
It really does. It shows that for a significant period, and for many, maybe most, ancient Israelites, Yahweh did have a divine partner. They invoked her name right alongside his in blessings. She wasn't just some foreign idol they were tempted by. She was integrated into their Yahwistic practice.
So then what happened? How did she go from being Yahweh's partner in popular religion to being enemy number one in the Bible?
This points to the power and the agenda of the later religious reforms, particularly the Deuteronomistic movement, starting around the 7th century BCE with King Josiah.
The Deuteronomists, they were the ones pushing for absolute loyalty to Yahweh alone, right? Centralized worship in Jerusalem.
Exactly. They were driving towards a hard, uncompromising monotheism. And to achieve that theological purity, they couldn't just ignore Asherah. They had to actively demonize her. They had to transform her image from Yahweh's consort, a relic of the older El-Asherah pairing, into the very symbol of forbidden foreign idolatry.
So all those commands to cut down the Asherah poles, destroy the groves, that was about erasing this history.
It seems so. It was about purifying Yahwism by removing any trace of this earlier, more complex divine structure that included a consort inherited from El. They successfully rewrote history, turning Yahweh's partner into a pagan threat, and thereby concealed the polytheistic, or at least henotheistic, origins of their own religious practice.
That's quite a cover-up, if that's what happened. It really solidifies that first scheme you mentioned, Yahweh, the regional god, taking over from the father El and erasing the evidence.
It fits that model very well, the consolidation, the usurpation, and the subsequent suppression of the earlier hierarchy and family structure.
Okay, so if this complex history lies buried beneath the surface of the Old Testament, how does this perspective change how we read the New Testament, particularly Jesus' teachings?
This is where it gets incredibly resonant, especially when you look closely at the Gospel of John. If we carry this distinction between the supreme, perhaps distant Father El, and the more active regional Yahweh forward, it sheds fascinating light on Jesus' specific theology.
How so?
Jesus consistently, almost relentlessly, focuses his devotion and his message on the Father. He draws a very clear line. Look at John 17:3, the high priestly prayer. He defines eternal life as knowing you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you have sent. He explicitly identifies the only true God as the Father who sent him.
Okay.
Or John 20:17, after the resurrection, he tells Mary Magdalene, do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God.
My Father and your Father, my God and your God. That phrasing is interesting. It separates Father and God slightly.
It does. It creates a potential hierarchy or distinction. The ultimate source is the Father, but there's also my God. Could my God refer to the established authority within the cosmic system, the God of Israel, Yahweh? Well, the Father points to the ultimate transcendent source, El. It fits the pattern.
And what about that really challenging passage in John 5, where Jesus says something about people never having seen or heard the Father?
Yes, John 5:37. It's profound. Jesus says, talking about the Father who sent him, you have neither heard his voice at any time nor seen his form.
But wait, the Old Testament is full of stories where people do see and hear God. Moses at the burning bush, Jacob wrestling the angel, the elders seeing God on Mount Sinai.
Exactly, that's the paradox. If the ultimate Father has never been seen or heard, then who were all those people in the Old Testament interacting with? Who spoke from the bush? Who wrestled with Jacob? Who gave the law on Sinai?
It couldn't have been the Father, according to Jesus in John 5.
Precisely. This leads some scholars, drawing on this El-Yahweh distinction, to suggest that the Old Testament theophanies, those visible, audible appearances, weren't appearances of the ultimate transcendent Father, El Elyon, the Father. They were appearances of a different figure.
The Yahweh, the regional administrator, or maybe the angel of Yahweh.
Yes, often identified as Yahweh himself in his active manifest role, or sometimes as his chief agent, the angel of the Lord, or even the pre-existent Logos, the Word. The point is, the one who appears, the one who interacts directly with the world and with Israel, is distinct from the utterly transcendent, unseen Father, whom Jesus identifies as the only true God.
So the visible speaking God of the Old Testament might be Yahweh, the assigned ruler of Israel, while the ultimate true God, the Father, remains hidden and transcendent.
That's the model this interpretation suggests. It resolves the paradox in John 5. The visible God is the administrator, Yahweh. The ultimate God is the unseen source, the Father's.
Wow. Okay, that distinction then leads right into another strand in the New Testament, all that talk about the ruler of this world or the God of this age.
Exactly. If we go back to Deuteronomy 32's original reading, Yahweh was one of the 70 sons of God assigned to rule a portion of the earth. He got Israel. But what about the other 69? And what if, as Psalm 82 suggests, these divine rulers prove corrupt or unjust?
Then the whole system of world governance under these beings could be flawed, maybe even adversarial to the true God's will.
That's the implication. And the New Testament picks up this theme powerfully. Think about John 12.31, 14.3, 16.1. Jesus speaks repeatedly about the ruler of this world being judged or cast out. He explicitly says his kingdom is not of this world order. John 18.36.
And Paul, doesn't he say something similar?
Even more explicitly, perhaps. In 2 Corinthians 4.4, Paul talks about the God of this age who has blinded the minds of unbelievers. He doesn't say Satan, interestingly, but the God of this age, ho theos tou agenos toutou.
The God of this age, implying not the ultimate eternal God, but the deity currently in charge of this particular world system.
That's precisely the implication. It strongly suggests a belief in a powerful but lesser divine being who holds authority over the current cosmic order, an order that is imperfect and distinct from the realm of the true Father. This God of this age could plausibly be identified with the chief administrator of the world system established by perhaps Yahweh himself, seen from a more critical cosmic perspective.
So the New Testament's critique of the world and its ruler might actually echo that original hierarchy from Deuteronomy 32, where the administrators of the nations weren't necessarily perfect or aligned with the highest good.
It aligns remarkably well. It suggests the true highest God, the Father, is separate from, and perhaps even in opposition to, the flawed cosmic system governed by a lower power, the God of this age.
And this is where the connection to Gnosticism comes in, right? Because they had similar ideas.
Exactly. The early Christian Gnostics, flourishing in the 2nd and 3rd century CE, were wrestling with the same problem. How can a perfect good God create a world filled with so much suffering, ignorance, and decay?
They couldn't reconcile the perfect Father with the messy reality of creation.
Right, so their solution was radical. They proposed a sharp distinction between the ultimate, transcendent, unknowable Father, the true God, and a lesser, flawed creator being, whom they called the demiurge.
The demiurge, the craftsman god.
Yes, often identified with the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh. They saw the demiurge as the one who actually fashioned the material, perishable world, Hyle. He wasn't necessarily always evil in all Gnostic systems, but he was seen as ignorant, arrogant, limited, and definitely not the highest God. He was the God of this world, trapped in his own flawed creation.
So they intuitively separated the creator God of Genesis from the ultimate spiritual Father that Jesus spoke of.
They did. And what's truly fascinating is that they developed these complex myths without access to the Ugaritic texts or the Qumran scrolls, revealing the older reading of Deuteronomy 32. They didn't have our modern archaeological and textual toolkit.
So how did they arrive at such a similar conclusion, that the God of the Old Testament wasn't the highest God?
It seems they reached it through philosophical reasoning and spiritual intuition, based on reading the scriptures they did have, including the Old Testament and early Christian writings, and observing the nature of the world. They sensed a fundamental incompatibility between the character of the God, often depicted in the Old Testament, jealous, wrathful, ordering violence, and the purely good, loving, transcendent Father described by Jesus.
So their intuition, their Gnostic insight, actually resonated with the hidden textual history that we've only recently uncovered, the history suggesting Yahweh was originally a subordinate figure.
It's a remarkable convergence. Their conclusion that the God of this world couldn't be the ultimate true God aligns strikingly well with the implications of the older textual layers of the Bible itself, particularly the divine council structure and the distinction between Elyon and Yahweh. It suggests they were picking up on real theological tensions embedded within the tradition.
Okay, this is a lot to take in. Let's try to synthesize this. We've gone from Ugarit and El through Deuteronomy 32's textual variants, the names El Shaddai and Yahweh, the Council in the Psalms, the archaeology of Asherah, and now the New Testament and Gnosticism. What's the bottom line here? What are the main ways to make sense of all this evidence?
Right. When you pull all these threads together, scholars tend to see two main coherent ways of framing the overall narrative. They're not mutually exclusive, but they offer slightly different emphases on how this shift from El to Yahweh happened and what it means.
Okay, what's the first way?
Scheme one is what we could call the monotheistic consolidation, or maybe more provocatively, the theft.
The theft, okay.
This model emphasizes the historical and political process. It argues that Yahweh was originally Israel's national God, one member of El's council, assigned his territory like the other sons of God. But then, through a long process driven by nationalism, historical events like the exile, and the work of specific theological schools like the Deuteronomists,
Yahweh essentially got promoted.
massively promoted. This scheme suggests that the biblical tradition actively and systematically transferred all the supreme functions, titles, creation roles, and even the consort originally belonging to the father god Elyon onto Yahweh. It involved erasing El from memory, demonizing Asherah, and rewriting texts like Deuteronomy 32 to present Yahweh as the sole, eternal, supreme deity from the very beginning.
So Yahweh stole the top job from his father, El, and covered his tracks.
That's the stark framing, yes. It emphasizes the human, historical, and even political forces behind the rise of monotheism as a process of consolidating power onto the national deity.
All right, that's one coherent picture. What's the second scheme?
Scheme 2 focuses less on historical usurpation and more on ontological difference. We could call it the transcendent father, or perhaps the Gnostic tilt.
The Gnostic tilt, how does this one work?
This model takes the New Testament distinctions, especially in John, much more seriously as reflecting a fundamental truth about reality. It posits that the true Father, the God Jesus speaks of, is utterly transcendent, completely outside and alien to the created, material, perishable cosmos.
So the Father isn't the direct creator or manager of this world.
Not directly. In this view, the power within this world system, the governing authority, belongs to a powerful but ultimately lesser being. This could be Yahweh, the chief administrator, or perhaps even El himself, seen now not as the ultimate unknown Father, but as the highest within the created order, still mortal or fallen relative to the true God who is beyond creation entirely.
So the God running the show, whether Yahweh or El, is inherently limited because the show itself, the material world, is limited, imperfect, finite.
Exactly. This scheme suggests the world, while perhaps beautiful, is fundamentally flawed and perishable, and the true God stands completely apart from it. This view resonates strongly with the Gnostic intuition and explains why the New Testament draws such sharp lines between the spiritual kingdom of the Father and the flawed order of this world ruled by the God of this age.
Okay, so scheme 1 is about historical consolidation and Yahweh taking over El's job. Scheme 2 is more about a fundamental split between the transcendent true God and the lesser God governing this imperfect world.
Correct. And notice, in both schemes, the end result is that the figure commonly understood simply as God in the Old Testament, Yahweh, is seen as distinct from and in some sense subordinate to a higher ultimate reality, El Elyon, the Father.
Whether he stole the job or was just the manager of a flawed system, he wasn't the absolute top from the start.
That's the core insight supported by the textual and archaeological evidence we've discussed. It forces you, when you read the Bible, to constantly ask, which God is being referred to here? Is it the localized, sometimes tribal, appearing and speaking God of the covenant, Yahweh? Or is it the universal, unseen, transcendent Father, El Elyon?
The text becomes layered, not flat.
Deeply layered. And interestingly, the Gnostic intuition that sharp separation between the world's creator-ruler and the true Father turns out to be surprisingly well aligned with what critical scholarship finds hidden beneath the surface of the biblical text itself.
So just to wrap up for everyone listening, this isn't some fringe idea we're inventing.
Not at all.
This is an honest attempt to grapple with the full picture presented by decades of mainstream, open scholarship, textual criticism, archaeology, comparative religion. It's about updating our understanding based on the evidence, even when it challenges long-held assumptions.
It requires us to see the development of Israelite religion as a dynamic, complex process, not a static revelation.
Right. So maybe here's the final thought for you to chew on, something to mull over after this deep dive. If Yahweh really did inherit the bull symbolism of El, and if he really did have Asherah as his consort for a time, reflecting El's own partnership, and if the oldest texts suggest he was one of 70 regional gods under El Elyon, then how do we view the later monotheistic consolidation? Was the suppression of that polytheistic past a necessary, even divinely guided theological evolution for Israel to reach a higher truth? Or was it essentially a successful historical cover-up, burying the original cosmic hierarchy to elevate the national god? Evolution or erasure? That's something worth pondering as you read these ancient texts yourself.